Welcome and thank you for joining us at today's webinar, The Nuts and Bolts of Transitions to Post-Secondary Education, part of the Paving the Way to College and Career virtual training series. This webinar is the second of a three-part series on paving the pathway to college and careers. The goal of the series is to build understanding and support the use of evidence-based interventions that improve transition to post-secondary education and training programs. The first webinar in November focused on laying the foundation for post-secondary success, including services and supports to encourage college going. Today we'll focus on the nuts and bolts of post-secondary transitions and look at how to support students to achieve their post-secondary goals. Then, later in April, we'll have our third webinar on building a post-secondary mindset, where we'll discuss how to promote social-emotional preparedness for post-secondary opportunities. At the end of the series, all webinars and materials will be released, and a professional development package for reuse in schools and districts will be posted. Today, we have several presenters here to lead our discussion. My name is Ashley Campbell, and you can see my picture in the top right corner, so you can match the voice. Also with us today are my colleagues, CJ Park and Karen Shackman from REL Appalachia, and Morley Keller and Bill DeBon from the National College Attainment Network. Before we get too far, we want to share what we mean by post-secondary and how we think about the relationship between college and career readiness and post-secondary transition as different things. The graphic shows how we're thinking about each side. On the left, college and career readiness refers to the knowledge and skills students should have at the end of high school to be successful in post-secondary pursuits. Post-secondary success, on the right side, occurs when students complete their training with the knowledge and skills necessary to be successful in the workforce. Post-secondary transition, then, in between and overlapping, are the supports and activities that begin in high school and help students start strong in post-secondary pursuits, whatever pathway that may be. It includes supports in high school on the left side of the graphic, like counseling or navigating financial aid applications. It also includes supports on the right during early post-secondary, such as college orientation. And it includes everything in between to help students make the leap, like a summer bridge program. Today we'll focus on some of the strategies for supporting students in post-secondary transitions related to post-secondary selection, application, and financial aid. Here's an overview of our agenda for the webinar. We'll talk about meeting goals and norms. Then we'll talk about why we're here and provide some data to highlight our context. Then we'll do a deep dive into evidence-based strategies for supporting students in selecting and applying to post-secondary institutions, completing applications, meeting testing requirements, and submitting financial aid applications. Then we'll hear from two practitioners who will talk about the work they do across the country to support post-secondary transitions. At the end, we'll wrap up and talk about next steps, including what you might apply from today's presentation to your own work. We have some norms to share for today's webinar. In short, we want to have an engaging hour together, so we ask that you participate actively. This means listen and respond to presenters using the chat box, respond to the questions we pose, and raise your own. It would even be great if you could turn off your email or set aside your phone for this hour. Don't be shy about asking questions and sharing ideas throughout the webinar, and let us know what worked and what we could do better. You can use the chat box to talk with us during the webinar, and at the end we'll have a survey for you to give feedback.
Thanks, Ashley. This is Karen Shackman here. Before we launch into the strategies, we just want to set the stage for why supporting students' transition to post-secondary is so important. So what do we know about college enrollment? Research shows us that students who are deemed academically prepared for college don't always make it to or through college. In fact, between 10 to 40% of accepted students don't show up to campus in the fall. That means anywhere from 1 to 4 students out of every 10 are not arriving. And we wonder why that might be happening. There are a whole host of reasons that contribute to students not showing up or not successfully transitioning from high school to post-secondary. If we want to improve persistence in post-secondary institutions, we need to know what the barriers are. Why are students not showing up? And why are so many who start not seeing their way through, not completing? While there are many reasons, research tells us that both financial and personal reasons seem to be the biggest cause of students not enrolling or not completing college or post-secondary training. It seems that these kinds of non-academic barriers related to being able to afford college, manage the experience, and be ready for the environment may be the biggest barriers. We should also consider that young people have a tendency to think in the here and now and are less likely to see or value that delayed benefits of a degree that is several years down the road, less likely to see the value of these degree that is several years down the road. So it's not surprising that they might lose momentum with the many steps, requirements, and deadlines associated with the application process. And unfortunately, throughout the process from initially considering college to actually enrolling, research tells us that low-income students fall behind their better-off peers in completing these many steps. For example, an estimated 30% of students in the bottom income quartile take the SAT, while 70% of students in the top income quartile do so. So there's significant support that's needed all along the way to address this inequity in access. In this webinar, we're focused on the non-academic nuts and bolts of post-secondary transition. And today, we're focused on the supports we can provide to help students take the steps to successfully transition. Specifically, as Ashley noted, we'll focus on 3 areas: selection, application, which includes completing the appropriate entrance exams and assessments in addition to completing the application, and financial supports. In reality, these 3 topics are certainly overlapping. For example, considering where to apply and applying to school are, of course, wrapped up in the question of financing the education. But for today, we'll cover each of these topics separately while acknowledging how interrelated we know they are. And now I'll turn it over to CJ to start us in the evidence-based strategies.
Thank you, Karen. This is CJ. As Karen mentioned, in the next several slides, we'll discuss some of the strategies that you might consider in supporting students in making the transition in the areas of selection, application, and financial supports. We will start with the selection supports. The process of selecting a post-secondary institution is not only complex, but can be overwhelming for students and their families. Even students with a wide range of resources at their fingertips often do not know how to navigate this process effectively. Rather than make active, informed choices resulting in applications to colleges that fit their personal needs and skills, they may apply to post-secondary programs that they're familiar with or that have the easiest application process. Based on a review of the literature, we'll present some evidence-based strategies that support students through this complicated process. But before we start, we wanted to pause here and ask you to reflect on the students that you know. We see that there's many kind of college access providers in the room with us today and folks who work directly with students. We wanted to ask, how do they make decisions about where to apply in post-secondary, and how do they go about the process of selecting a school? There should be a chat box in the bottom of your screen now where folks can kind of share their ideas. I see folks are trying to type. I see Charles is sharing financial aid award letters. That's something that influences their choices. That makes complete sense. Proximity to parental home. I think other things that I've heard is, what preceding cohorts of students at their high school might be going, where their peers might be going. Peter sharing where siblings went. Paul is sharing a little bit about sports and what names they heard about March Madness, so those kind of big name schools. Family obligations, finances, things like that. I think these are all great responses, and I think I can tell from your shared experiences that you all kind of spend a lot of time working with students. Okay. So supporting students to make intentional and informed choices in selecting post-secondary institutions. first starts by helping students identify post-secondary programs that match their qualifications, interests, and goals. And while this seems intuitive, students might not fully understand the matching process or why some institutions might be a better fit. For example, for academically successful low-income students, undermatching or attending an institution that is not as academically rigorous as they could because it is familiar or nearby is a common phenomenon. And this is particularly important for college completion, as some research shows that students who are well-matched are more likely to persist to graduation. However, students may also have compelling reasons to stay local, such as the need to care for family. So that engagement with students to understand their particular context and concerns is important. Once you work with students to identify a set of matching programs, you should encourage students to apply to a range of options given their qualifications. Students often don't apply to a range of colleges. So this range should include a set of safety schools that students will almost certainly get into, ones that match the student's qualifications, and ones a student might wish to attend but would be considered a reach given the student's qualifications. Applying to more schools increases students' chances of getting in and ending up in a good fit. Another thing that you can do is share information on net costs, what the student might pay after financial aid versus the advertised sticker cost of college can potentially help students see college as an option in a broader range of schools of options. There are a number of search tools available to help students identify college matches based on specific criteria. For example, the U.S. Department of Education has a College Navigator tool which allows students to search for schools based on specific criteria. I'm sure many of you have heard of this before. In addition, the National College Attainment Network has a resource for incorporating fit and match into the college advising and data programs. The links for these resources are at the back of the deck, which will be made available to you.
Thank you, CJ. So once students have identified an appropriate and varied set of options, as CJ referenced, they benefit from supports in completing all the requirements of the application. And many of you do this work every day and are working with students regularly on this. So we are pausing here to hear from you about what you see in your experience as the biggest barriers to students completing their post-secondary applications. If you'd enter your thoughts below, we'll just get a sense of your experiences and what you see in your students in terms of barriers to applying. I'm seeing application fees as an issue. Parents who are overwhelmed by the whole process, maybe they've never been through it before. And we pause here as folks enter their thoughts. Lack of awareness of the process. Yeah, it's a daunting and overwhelming process and with many steps and unlike anything most students have ever experienced before. Access to technology, the length of the application, students' documentation status, posing an uncertainty about whether or not they can apply, the cost of college being a barrier, fear of the environment being so different from what they've experienced. Again, folks are referencing just the process, the overwhelming nature of the process for students and for families. Fear of not being accepted, putting all the work in and then it not bearing fruit. Oh, and here's another one. Thank you, Bill. The idea that there are post-secondary pathways that aren't for your on-campus experience and opening students up to the different sorts of options that are available to them as post-secondary training. Language barriers and documentation. Let's just pause and let a few more people comment before we move on. Lack of academic preparation. And our last, our focus for this series is on the non-academic supports, but in all of our work that we've done to look for resources, certainly there are a range of recommendations and resources about academic supports to prepare students for post-secondary education. And again, we come back to the affordability issue and the cost. So with that, we'll move on. Thanks, everyone, for sharing your thoughts. And what I'll do here is share some ideas about how to help and ways to help supporting students in their college applications. And these all come from the resources identified at the bottom of the slide. So students can benefit from a set of comprehensive supports through the entire application process, and we'll present some of these supports here. So first, create an email to track students' applications. Often students don't use email much anymore, which, to me is surprising, but true. And so having and checking an email is an important part of the application process that we can help students to prepare for. Teachers and counselors can help students to set up that email and remind them to check it. Creating timelines and communicating deadlines for students, providing students with these detailed timelines to follow can be instrumental in helping them to meet all the deadlines in this sort of overwhelming process. And we've included an example on a subsequent slide of the kind of timeline that might be useful. Seeking application and testing fee waivers, this is something that came up in the comments just before. That can remove barriers to applying. Students may not know about the options that are available for waivers, and counselors and teachers can help with that. Support students in the essay writing process, and I'll talk about that in just a moment. And assign or allocate staff to review the applications to ensure they're complete and ready for submission before students press send. And these are all important supports, but of course it can be challenging to provide all these supports. A few concrete ways to do so include integrating these steps of the application process into courses, such as using English classes to draft college essays or employing an advisory period to set a timeline for students or to review applications. So using existing avenues that are available to support students in the application process. Another idea is to hold post-secondary application weeks, and this would be a way to focus students in completing their applications by using a series of classes and additional activities in a designated period of time to focus in on those applications. And finally, knowing that the caseload for counselors at high schools is quite high, it may be difficult for them to provide all these comprehensive supports described here to navigate the application process. So high schools could consider formally partnering with the college access organizations or with post-secondary institutions in their area that may be able to help bring those resources to some or all of your students. And I know that several of the people on this webinar represent some of those types of organizations. So we've discussed application processes and supports, and of course college entrance exams are a part of that process. Many colleges require the submission of the ACT or the SAT scores when students apply, and there are ways to help ensure that students take the test and do well on it. One strategy is to implement universal school day test taking. That is, all students take the test during a designated school day. Having this type of testing policy can impact whether and where students enroll in college. One study reported significant impacts of this universal testing on college enrollment in Illinois, and positive, though insignificant, effects in Colorado and Maine. In addition, helping students apply for testing fee waivers eliminates that financial barrier. This might be done as part of that advisory period or application week that I mentioned on the prior slide. Another strategy is to ease the process and reduce anxiety for students by establishing a testing center on the high school campus. Students come to the high school for the test rather than having to travel to an unfamiliar location. You can also help students by communicating with them about the testing. Similar to the timeline we described on the last slide, providing a clear testing schedule and timeline and reminding students with email and phone blasts helps to ensure they don't miss important dates. And on the slide here, you'll see this nudge hotline, and it's a resource for educational practitioners to help them craft effective messages for students, and we encourage you to access that resource. Or consider sort of low-tech, having an information table at events that students and families attend, such as sporting events. These tables can provide all in one place all the necessary information that students and families need that they might not be getting if they're not coming into the school regularly. You can also help students prepare to take the exams, offer training or test-taking strategies during class time, or offer exam preparation classes or workshops, either directly through the school or by partnering with college access programs, as we mentioned on the last slide. And that test preparation could include providing direct tutoring, ordering practice tests, or using training software. Here are some examples, as I've mentioned, of the types of timelines and schedules to support students in completing the application and assessment requirements. Note that these may be hard to read, but all of these resources are provided to you in the slide deck. These two come from the IES practice guide that we drew on for the information for this webinar, and NCAN is an additional resource that, with several resources that are provided at the end of the slide deck. So with that, I turn it to Ashley.
Thank you. Okay. So we have talked about and shared some strategies about selecting where to apply and then getting the applications and assessments done. Those are not small hurdles for students. Next, we know that the financial barrier is also a big one. In fact, research shows that while FAFSA application rates have risen over time, that is from 50% of undergraduates in the 1999-2000 school year completing them to 70% in the 2011-2012 school year completing FAFSA, there are still substantial numbers of eligible students who fail to apply. Just a few facts here to help drive home the importance of completing the FAFSA. Take a moment to read through these. First, the good news. Completion rates for high school seniors have gone up slightly in the last 4 years. This is important because research shows that completing the FAFSA is related to enrolling in college, and many students who don't complete it would have qualified for aid. They're missing out on an average of $4,000. So why don't students and families complete the FAFSA? We're back to the chat box. Please take some time and share with us what's going on in your region and in your work about what are the biggest barriers to students in completing the FAFSA application. They don't understand it, or they're not aware. They don't see how it connects to their other loans. Parents aren't helping. That's right. There's a ton of information that has to go into that they need additional support. Some families haven't completed their taxes and don't have the information. That's a huge barrier. Fear of the process. Thank you, Paula, for putting that out there. That is one that we hear a lot. Or they don't think they'll get anything. And that's really important when the research shows a lot of money is left on the table every year, but a lot of students think they're not going to qualify anyway, so why bother? Not understanding the vocabulary, or parents not understanding the application. That's right. It is not simple. We've all experienced that. I really appreciate these comments coming in, if for nothing else, a sense of solidarity, that we are all experiencing the same common things. This last one from Paula is really important, being an undocumented student. There is a real fear of filling out paperwork. So let's take a look at what the research shows. And I know, given your responses, that you are not going to be surprised. You said many of the things just now, but here are some of the reasons that the research tells us students don't complete the FAFSA. They might not know it exists, or it seems too long and complicated. And I think that these reasons also go for their parents, right, or their caregiver or whoever's helping them with the forms. They may be afraid of the cost of college and fear student debt. They may think they wouldn't qualify anyway, or they miss deadlines. And many just don't want to share personal information with the government. So what can we learn about overcoming these barriers from the research? Research that has examined the value of supporting families in completing the FAFSA has shown that personalized assistance in completing the FAFSA has increased the number of completed applications for low and moderate income families. In a well-known study, researchers placed participants who had come to an accounting firm for tax assistance into 3 randomly assigned groups. First group, you get no information and no assistance with FAFSA. We just do your taxes like business as usual. The second group, we'll do your taxes, but we might also give you some information about FAFSA, tell you it exists and that you should apply. In the third group, we not only give you information about the FAFSA, but they helped with completing it for assistance. And that information included some estimates of the value. The researchers found that those participants in the last group who got both information and personal support had significant increases for FAFSA completion rates compared to those who had just information but no help. It was not enough to just get information about it and be told to do it. They really needed to be walked through it, and that ties back to a lot of the barriers that you all called out and the research called out about it being complicated, hard to understand. All right, we have some other research. In other research, which was a literature review of financial aid published between 2000 and 2013, they looked across all of these studies and found that there was some evidence that providing students and families with information about the FAFSA early, in other words, not waiting until the end of their junior year or senior year, giving them information during middle school and early high school was helpful. So these are a couple of ideas that you all can think about in your own work to see where you are. Okay, so now I want to turn it over to Morralee Keller and Bill DeBon from the National College Attainment Network. We're lucky to have them with us today. They're going to share both school and community-based practices that show promise in increasing FAFSA application. Morralee is the Director of Technical Assistance at NCAN and provides professional development to direct service providers and managers to help ensure the success and sustainability of college access programs. She consults on governance issues, programming, data collection, research, and best practices, and also develops comprehensive training materials. Bill DeBon is NCAN's Director of Data and Evaluation. He leads NCAN's benchmarking project, which examines the enrollment and completion outcomes of students served by college access and success programs. So all of those people that we are working to serve, he's tracking the data. Bill also oversees NCAN's Data and Evaluation Toolkit and the Form Your Future FAFSA Tracker. Welcome, and I will turn it over to you now.
Great, thank you. This is Morralee Keller. Thanks to our REL colleagues for inviting us here. What my portion of the presentation is do, we're going to talk to you about some strategies that we have seen school districts use around the country, and then we're also going to talk about some community-wide strategies, and Bill's going to cover some data elements around tracking FAFSA completion. Please know that as we go through this list of strategies here that we're not indicating that every school district has to do every strategy that we have listed here. What's really most important is that we give you a menu of options and that you determine what works best for the students that you're serving. So we're going to start with some school-based strategies, and one, of course, the more obvious are to host FAFSA completion events at various dates and times. So there are a lot of practices out there where schools sometimes hold a financial aid information night. There are also practices where a school district may hold a session to help families complete their FAFSA. But please notice that we have an S on this, events, at various dates and times, because you have to really think about multiple opportunity strategies, because holding it on a Thursday night at 7 p.m. may not work for all the students or families that you're attempting to serve. So thinking about holding multiple strategies at various dates and times throughout the FAFSA completion cycle you should see results improve for your FAFSA completion rates. Building a FAFSA strategy team in each building. We all know that it cannot just be the senior school counselor who's responsible all by themselves to make sure that all the FAFSA completion happens for the students in the building. So really putting a team together who can promote events, look at data that you'll hear Bill talk about, and things like that. So counselors, maybe teachers, administrator, all kinds of folks need to be involved in a FAFSA team in a building. Providing detailed timelines to students and families. We have all seen different grade level timelines about things students should be accomplishing each year as they're getting ready to go to college. The senior year, there should probably be a very specific timeline that's made available to parents and students in terms of the timing of, testing and getting an FSA ID to complete the FAFSA, getting the FAFSA completed, understanding if the student was selected for verification and do they need additional assistance, and then obviously leading to the award letter receipt for students. Implementing building level activities to reach goals. One of the things that we've seen happen, are buildings that set goals. What percentage of their seniors would they like to see complete the FAFSA? As you know, around the country we have Louisiana on the books and a couple other states who have passed the legislation where students are going to be required to complete the FAFSA as a graduation requirement with some exemption options in those states. But setting different level activities in your building, and it could be hosting those events. It could be using a peer team, as we mentioned in the next one, who can promote FAFSA completion or even help students with FAFSA completion. Can you hold FAFSA Friday frenzies in your building? Things like that that will get the students involved. Participating in a district FAFSA completion competition, and we also have state that run statewide FAFSA completion competitions. So thinking about setting your goal, what can we do, to encourage students to get completed by a certain date? Are there any types of rewards that can happen for, the buildings with the highest FAFSA completion rates or those with the largest increases in FAFSA completion rate? So, one thing that we've learned is when you run a competition, particularly among a district where there's multiple high schools, no high school wants to be at the bottom of the list when we take a look at completion percentages as we're monitoring them throughout the year. Offering students incentives or prizes for completion to meet the FAFSA goal. When we talk about those building level activities, can we set a target date, for example, of December 15th, and every student who has their FAFSA completed by December 15th gets invited to a lunch pizza party in the building? Are there gift cards or T-shirts that students can have when they provide the evidence that they've completed their FAFSA? We've seen other incentives for things like waiving the price of a prom ticket. Different kinds of things like that that will be an incentive to these students to get their FAFSA completed, and of course in particular by the deadline date. If they're applying to institutions that have priority deadline dates for incoming freshmen, you need to make sure that they're completing those applications in a timely fashion. It wouldn't make sense if we didn't have the ability to track the completion and monitor on a regular basis. So we're in an era where there are a lot of the state agencies around the country who receive the FAFSA data from the federal government and have set up a mechanism to share it with the school districts. And this is not just the number of students who've completed the FAFSA, but this is student level FAFSA data, so that you have the names of the students in your particular building or district who have completed the FAFSA. Oftentimes, that in order to access that information, you may have a superintendent who would have to have signed some version of a data sharing agreement. But this is really helps with targeted outreach efforts to students. So if you know who's completed and you're tracking who's completed those admissions applications, and you're now tracking who has completed FAFSA, you now can target outreach to the students who have a missing element. So if you can see they've done an admissions application but it doesn't look like they've completed a FAFSA, we don't have to run general announcements in the morning that say if you haven't completed your FAFSA, come see the school counselor. You can do very targeted outreach with that student level data to know exactly who has not completed. And so we encourage you to discover if that opportunity is available in your state. If you're already taking advantage of it, that is fabulous. If you need to kind of do some research to figure out how to make that happen for your particular high school or your particular school district, we strongly, strongly encourage you to do that. A lot of our districts will also run all kinds of versions of social media campaigns. And so whether those social media campaigns are run by, again, by the adults, or whether you use peer counselors or things like that, communicating to our high school students through social media is oftentimes a better way than flyers or announcements or emails home and things like that. When it comes to FAFSA completion strategies, a lot of the ones that happen inside a particular school building or inside a particular district are probably some of the ones with the best outcomes, but also, you know, the concept of it takes a village, right? So a lot of times you have to get the community involved, and there's various ways to do that. One of the things that can happen are building completion dashboards and or monitoring dashboards provided by another source. So if you have the ability to get that information from your state agency about your students, do you want to put a dashboard up that continues to show the numeric progress towards your goal? Or is there another organization, or if your state runs a statewide competition, are there dashboards that can be viewed to see how your particular building or your particular school district is progressing towards the goal, and are they completing FAFSAs at a better or higher rate than the previous year? Also, sometimes running community messaging campaigns involving your key education stakeholders and using a variety of methods. We've seen everything from the higher ed institutions, you know, getting involved in messaging campaigns, to businesses and industries. There is a city in Texas that runs a FAFSA completion week in which all those businesses that have signs out front, you know, put messages up during FAFSA completion week about encouraging families to get their FAFSA done for the year. So all kinds of messaging campaigns. You can get your local media involved. So there are a lot of different ways to do that. Local radio stations, all different kinds of folks who can help get the message shared across the community that it's time for students to be completing their FAFSA if they want to have some type of post-secondary option upon graduation. Creating partnerships with local higher ed institutions. Oftentimes, if you're hosting those events, for example, in your buildings, and you've got some partnerships built with local colleges in your area, you may often get financial aid folks who will come and volunteer at your events to serve as a resource for the families who are working on completing their FAFSAs. There are some institutions that will do targeted outreach to students from particular districts, often those that are in the backyard, about making sure that they have the FAFSA completed in time to meet a deadline. Oftentimes some places like the community colleges and things like that may hold FAFSA completion workshops that are open to the public. And so if your FAFSA events have concluded for the year and your local community college are hosting some open forums to come in and get help with completing the document, those are the kind of partnerships that you want to have with your higher ed institutions. Offering high-quality FAFSA training programs for community volunteers. When we talk about hosting multiple events, you have to have some folks in the room who can assist the families in completing their FAFSA. So there are a lot of programs around the country that will use community volunteers who are trained. They can be trained, for example, by the higher ed personnel from your local institutions. Who are also participating in the workshop. So getting lots of folks trained and thinking about training people. We often see school counselors who may go out to professional development opportunities that are targeted to school counselors around the financial aid process. But do those school counselors come back and train other folks in the district to assist with those FAFSA completion nights? Identifying and collaborating with community partner organizations with similar missions and goals. So oftentimes you may find local community-based organizations that want and provide support and services to students who are going to pursue some type of post-secondary credential or degree. So boys and girls clubs, different kinds of folks like that. So can you make sure that you are reaching out, and have you invited any orgs like that, for example, to be on your FAFSA team to make sure that it is a community-wide effort in supporting these students in completing their FAFSA for the upcoming year. If you are fortunate enough to be a school district, you may have a college access organization. If you have one of those in your backyard, then making sure you have very high-level engagement with your local college access organization, establishing goals, understanding who will support what efforts in assisting students and families in getting their FAFSA completed. So there are a lot of different strategies that we can do inside the school building and also where we can get the community involved. And again, I'll reiterate that you have to choose kind of from the menu of what works best in your particular area. Some of these strategies will not work everywhere. So we strongly encourage you to take a look at this menu, think about what you may already be doing, or there's some things you saw on this list that you could add to your efforts to help increase FAFSA completion for your students. I'm now going to turn it over to my colleague Bill, who's going to talk to you a little bit about tracking the FAFSA and what kind of options that you have out there. So Bill, it's all you.
Great. Thank you so much, Morley. Before I jump in, I do just want to piggyback on something that Morley said, which is that, she has provided a great menu of different kinds of strategies and options that school districts and communities can use to drive FAFSA completion. And the message that I hope attendees here and kind of more broadly are really hearing is you don't need to reinvent the wheel around FAFSA completion. There's been quite a lot of research around FAFSA completion. NCAN has coordinated 2 FAFSA completion challenges in cities across the country. We have seen a lot of great community-wide strategies for driving FAFSA completion. So if you're not really sure where to start, try to take a look at what has already been out there and been studied and see if you can adapt that to your community. That said, it is also really valuable to continue to innovate, right? And so if you have a great idea that you'd like to test for FAFSA completion, don't be afraid to do that either. So I'm here to talk about FAFSA completion data, and there's a really great quote about data from the Sherlock Holmes books, and it comes from a case where Holmes and Watson have not yet solved the case, and Sherlock Holmes exclaims to his assistant, "Data, data, data, I can't make bricks without clay." And in this case, the FAFSA data is giving us the resources to make insights into students' FAFSA completion and to help them complete the FAFSA and drive post-secondary outcomes. So for example, using survey data from the National Center for Education Statistics, NCAN was able to take a look at the association between FAFSA completion and post-secondary enrollment. And we found that students from the lowest socioeconomic quintile who completed a FAFSA were 127% more likely to be enrolled in the fall following high school graduation than their counterparts without a FAFSA completion. So that's a big number. Similarly, FAFSA completion data allow us to take a look at FAFSA completion by school district poverty levels. And unfortunately, in far too many states across the country, students from lower income school districts are less likely to complete a FAFSA, even though they would be more likely to receive federal student aid, right? So using some of those top-level data give us some real insights about the importance of FAFSA completion and general trends. But what I really want to talk with you about is some of the more granular level FAFSA completion data that's out there. So Morley mentioned that a number of states are able to pass through student-level FAFSA completion data through to school districts and in some cases community-based organizations. The number of states that can do that is huge. It's actually 48 states have signed what they call the SAIG, the Student Aid Internet Gateway, or Information Gateway, Student Aid Information Gateway. The 2 who haven't, as far as I know, are Nevada and New Hampshire. The process for getting those data vary pretty widely by state, but definitely recommend contacting your state Department of Education to try to sign the agreement that would pass through student-level data to your school or district. Because as Morley said, they have a really, really valuable use case in helping you target FAFSA completion really specifically. So definitely recommend that. if you can't go the route that I'm talking about to get the student level data from the state, Federal Student Aid each week releases school-level data on FAFSA submissions and completions. And so you can see an example here on the slideshow. This is from Tennessee, and this shows the applications that were processed by Federal Student Aid through February 7th of this cycle. And so the way this data works from FSA, every week on Friday, there's a state-level file that comes out. There's 52 files, and the files are populated with school-level data on completions and submissions this cycle, and then compares it to the previous cycle. So you can see on the slideshow here, this is maybe not in the most usable form that it could be, certainly a valuable data source, but needs a little bit of processing to become a little bit more valuable. And so what we have done here at NCAN is to convert these data into something we like to call the Form Your Future FAFSA Tracker. Let me put that link for you here in the chat in case you'd like to go and explore. So what we do is we take these data every week, we clean them up, and we put them in this really visually attractive platform. And we are ranking states each week on the basis of two different scenarios. One is the percentage of the senior class who have completed a FAFSA within a state, and the other is the year-over-year percent change in the number of completions through a given week. So we originally intended this to kind of spur some friendly competition among states, to be a resource for schools, and districts, and cities who were interested in seeing how they were doing relative to the previous year. And we've been really excited at the reaction that we've gotten from people all across the country who often email me to say, when is the new data coming up? And are looking for kind of specific analyses and just are really interested in seeing where their state ranks among other states. So like I said, these are updated as soon as the data come in every week from Federal Student Aid, and they collect, this reports data at the national, state, city, district, and school levels. So let me show you another example here. So like I just mentioned, there are 5 different levels that the platform shows, and if you click on the Make Comparisons button on Form Your Future, you'll get to this page here where you can select your state, select your city, select your district, and you will see the different comparisons year over year through the most recent date that we have. So what is the use case here? Well, certainly you're not going to be looking at individual student completions. These are all school level data. So you're not going to be able to go down the hall and say, Bill, I see you haven't completed your FAFSA. What can I do to help you on that front? But as a more blunt instrument for school and district leaders, it does at least give some sense of relative progress made over the previous year. It also allows you to see how are neighboring school districts doing. If you see, for example, that a community near you is doing exceptionally well year over year, maybe you want to reach out to them and say, hey, are you employing a new FAFSA strategy that maybe I could learn from? Similarly, if you're seeing that a neighbor is struggling with their FAFSA completion, maybe reach out to them and see if there's something that you can lend them in terms of professional insight. So really helpful on that front. I think the state level analysis. Let me switch back here. I think the state level analysis also continues to be really useful for keeping policymakers interested and engaged in FAFSA completion. We often get calls from legislators' offices, for example, asking about what their state can do to move up in the FAFSA completion rankings. And so then we can send them all the great FAFSA completion resources, many of which you've already seen on this webinar, and say, okay, if you want some ideas about how to drive FAFSA completion, here they are for you. Additionally, there are a number of states who are considering implementing policies around FAFSA completion. And so, for example, Tennessee has the Tennessee Promise, and so consistently their FAFSA completion is quite high as students work to take advantage of that policy. Louisiana, a few years ago, started including FAFSA completion as a requirement for high school graduation, and so their FAFSA completion rates are also quite high now, certainly partially as a result of that. So there are some policy levers that that show up in these data as well, and that's another way that we're kind of keeping attention on FAFSA completion. So again, like I said, the gold standard here would be to reach out to your state, try to get the student level FAFSA completion numbers, and then put them into a really thoughtful process with a range of activities that Morley said that could catch a lot of different families and students, engage their interest in a number of different ways. But failing that, you can at least try to use these school-level data by state, released each week by FSA, to get some general idea of how you're doing in terms of progress year over year. So I'm really grateful to REL Appalachia for the chance to present today, and I'm really looking forward to your questions, either about FAFSA completion data here, anything Morley talked about, or even our work here at NCAN as time allows. So thanks again.
Thank you so much, Bill and Morley. And as a researcher, we always share the evidence-based practices that have tons and tons of research, but to reach that bar, it's pretty high when we know that there are a lot of things in the field that work that just don't happen to have a research study behind them. So I have found the strategies that you all have shared and the ways to track the data to be really, really helpful. Thank you. I'm sure folks listening also agree. So now it's your turn, everyone else, to ask questions of Bill and Morley while we have them and get some answers to things that you would like help with. I did receive a couple of questions directly to me. One of them is, how often would you recommend we share FAFSA data, and who should we be sharing it with?
Bill, do you want to answer that, or you want me to jump on it?
If you want to tackle, I'll come in behind you.
Okay. You know, that is really going to vary from district to district, but I really think weekly makes sense. So this data is going to be updated. You know, some states do updates if they provide the student level data, so sometimes how often you share it. If your district does not do real-time updates or chooses only to update the file once a week or once every other week, then how often you share your data may be driven by how often it is updated within the state. But if you have access to it on a regular basis, then we would certainly encourage probably weekly updates to the FAFSA team. And so you're going to want your school counselors obviously to be aware, administrators to be in the know about how you're doing in FAFSA completion, particularly if you've set a goal. You need to make students aware, you know, maybe by percentages of how that particular high school or that particular district is doing and moving towards. But weekly would be ideal, but you can do it as often as your state agency provides updates to you.
That makes a lot of sense. The only thing that oh, I'm sorry. Can I jump in real quick?
Yeah, go ahead.
What Morley said makes a lot of sense on a weekly basis. The only thing that I would add is that in some states, federal or state grant aid is awarded on a first-come, first-served basis. And so if you're in a situation or in a state where that is the case, then certainly you want to be looking at FAFSA completion as often as possible. It's especially important in those states to make sure that students are aware that they need to complete the FAFSA as early as possible in the cycle to make sure that they're getting the best chance of getting state grant aid.
Okay. And the second part of that question is, and who are we sharing it with? Who are the most effective people in a building that need to know this information to help increase those FAFSA completion rates?
Well, as I mentioned, school counselors, I think school administrators. If you've built a FAFSA team, then you certainly want to make sure that team members are aware, and then also, particularly if you've set a goal for your building or whatever, letting students know how the, you know, what the aggregate percentage is. How are we moving towards the goal that we've set for this particular building or school district?
Great. So I'll remind folks to use the chat box to send questions. I am getting one or two directly to me, which is great, but I might miss it. So if you send it out to the group, we'll get it for sure. give you a minute. You mentioned a lot of building level activities, Morley, that says which ones do you think are most effective? And this is coming, it looks like, from a rural community because, as we know, the context really matters. For some things work for some groups and not others. Are there any you've seen that work really well? Some of your favorites?
Well, obviously the hosting a variety of completion events at different dates and times so that you can serve the entire audience. The other thing, though, that you'll see sometimes in the smaller communities is the FAFSA completion event may not be at the school building. There may be a gathering place in the community that may make more sense and more accessible to parents. Also, we have to think about who our parent audience is, and do we need to, we've worked at school districts where they make sure that there are some bilingual folks, there at the completion workshops to make sure, because sometimes parents may shy away if English is not their first language, so making sure that everybody understands that there are some resources there, to help with the actual completion. Some folks don't know that the FAFSA comes in Spanish, for example. So doing things like that, and then really setting a goal and the tracking of the completion, and particularly if you have access at the student level data, those are really the things that you're going to see are going to move the needle. Messaging is always important. If students don't know about the FAFSA, don't know when to do it, etc. So messaging is probably one of your critical elements as well.
Okay, we've got a question that's related to both messaging and the research-based practice that we suggested earlier, that we start telling them earlier, like middle school. So if you are going to inform middle schoolers about FAFSA, just how much information should you be providing at that time, would you recommend?
Well, I think what you have to do really at middle school is you've got to increase the parent and student awareness that there are options out there to meet the educational costs. So are you going to be doing a line-by-line demo for middle school parents of the FAFSA? That's probably not the level that you need to get down to, but you need to let them know about the things that they can do to be preparing along the way. And a lot of the things to be preparing to get ready for the FAFSA and securing a lot of financial aid for college can be advice about things that the student can do academically, things that students can do for participating, community service, things like that, that would build a resume that may ultimately bring scholarship dollars. You have to let them know there's money available from, the federal government. You should share information about what's available in your particular state. And if your community has some resources available around financial aid, if you live in a city where there's a promise program, any of those kind of things, that's the kind of information you need to start to share in middle school, and the information will continue to get refined as you share information as the student progresses through high school until we are down to, this is how you answer this number question on the FAFSA.
I heard a really clever strategy this morning. Morley and I were at the same event, and I heard a strategy for early awareness that really caught me as kind of novel. This was even before middle school. The panelist was saying that instead of playing bingo in their elementary school, they play FAFSA. They have FAFSA written across the top of the card. I'm not sure how that works out with having two F's in the acronym FAFSA, but it's never too early for early awareness, and that caught me as kind of interesting.
We have one more question, and it's about the complexity of the FAFSA, and the staff in the building need to be able to support students. So what kind of training do you recommend? How do we prepare staff to support students in FAFSA completion? What do the staff need to know and be able to do?
Well, there's probably a couple levels of information. Depending on the role that the staff wants to play, if they're going to be a supporter and promoter of the college process and completing the FAFSA, they need to know about the document, they need to know the website, they need to know the timing, of when students ought to be able to complete the FAFSA, and so hopefully school counselors can continue to share that. And that document that you may share with seniors about the timeline, you need to make sure that faculty are involved in that. If you have community members or additional school members who want to really assist in FAFSA completion workshops, that's when you probably really in the month of September are probably going to host some kind of training that is kind of a line item, FAFSA completion training event for the folks that really want to get down into the details so that they're all trained. And then when the FAFSA opens on October 1st and you have your set of events scheduled for the year, you can get these highly trained folks hopefully to volunteer and assist the families in completing the FAFSA at the events that you host.
Great. Thank you so much. I think that's it. I don't see any other questions coming in. Doing a quick scan. I have not missed any. So we will go ahead. Thank you, Morley and Bill, again, so much. The resources that NCAN provides and the information is really useful. So thank you. If you are leaving us early, please don't forget to complete the survey. There is a link there. But before you go, we do have some wrap-up and next steps that we think will be useful. I'm going to turn it over to Karen Shackman again.
Thank you, Ashley. And again, thanks so much to Morley and Bill for all their very useful and detailed information. As someone who is many years away from completing FAFSA for my own children, it's useful to know how many resources are out there. So thank you so much for that. We're coming close to the end of the webinar, but we do have a few more things we'd like to share with you. First, we referenced a number of resources over the course of today, and on the slides, which are downloadable in the corner of the Adobe platform, you can find all these slides and links. All the resources and tools and links. We referenced, for example, the National College Attainment Network has a number of very useful resources in addition to the FAFSA resources, other kinds of resources like a college prep timeline. So please don't hesitate to make use of those. And before we lose you, as we come to the close of the webinar, we ask that you take a moment in the chat to let us know what about today. Did you hear something in particular that you think I'm going to go back and do this in my school, or you thought, oh, this is something I'm going to take to my colleagues for us to discuss? We'd very much like to hear what kinds of strategies you heard from today that are most helpful to you, that you think you might want to try. And we definitely want to encourage you before you go to please complete the stakeholder feedback survey. This really helps us to know what we're doing well and what we can improve on in the webinars that we provide to the field. I also want to let you know that a recording and the materials will be available very soon on our website. I'm sorry, I'm just making sure I have this right. The recording and materials actually will be emailed to all registrants. So whether you were here today or if you are someone who registered and couldn't join us, the recording and the materials will be provided by email in a few weeks as well. So I'm just looking to see the kinds of comments that folks are saying. The Find the Fit information was really interesting to folks. The idea of hosting a FAFSA completion session at a central location, particularly in a rural site, being useful. Printing out specific slides, 20 to 30, 20, 21, 29, and 30. I don't even remember what slides those are, but I think those are some of the strategies that we presented to you, so that's grateful that those are helpful to you. And just looking at some of the rest, reviewing the slides, pull information to introduce into our pre-ETS program for youth 14 to 21. That's great, so thinking again about reaching kids in the middle school grade. So again, let us know. It's very helpful for us to know what here was most useful. That's helpful to us actually as we think about other presentations, what kinds of information, what kinds of strategies are most useful for us to dig up and share, and what kinds of resources people can make the most use of. So before we close out, I want to leave a little more time for folks to comment, and then when we say goodbye, you'll be taken directly to the stakeholder feedback survey. So thank you all again for your participation. And and we just ask that you do give us this feedback and let us know. It does help us and inform our practice as we provide more training and technical support. So with that, I want to again thank my colleagues in REL Appalachia and our friends from NCAN, Bill and Maura Lee, for their time today, and for all of you from across the country who joined us and shared your questions and your thoughts. It's been a very interesting hour plus for me, and I hope the same for you. So with that, we hope you have a wonderful rest of your day and enjoy springtime, as this image on the screen is meant to invoke. So thanks very much for joining us.